Hi, automotive enthusiasts. Welcome to Overdrive Insider, where today we dive into a machine that didn't just change the way motorcycles looked, but reshaped the very culture of American custom building, the Harley-Davidson Knucklehead of the 1940s. This isn't simply a story about an engine with rocker covers shaped like fists, or a bike that carried a generation of riders into the post-war years. It's about how one motorcycle became the raw canvas for creativity, rebellion, and the roots of an entire style that still dominates the custom scene more than 80 years later. We're going to explore why this model captured imaginations, how riders transformed it into a stripped-down statement of individuality, and what lasting mark it left on both Harley's legacy and global motorcycle culture. When people think of a chopper with its stretched frame and minimalist bodywork, or a bobber with a stance that screams attitude, they might not realize that, so many of those elements trace back to the choices made by young builders working with knuckleheads after the Second World War. They didn't have design, studios, or high-end fabrication shops. They had wrenches, hacksaws, welding torches, and a determination to ride something that was theirs and theirs alone. Imagine being a returning GI with mechanical training from the military, looking at your stock motorcycle and thinking it was too heavy, too cluttered, too much like everyone else's. So you stripped off the fenders, cut down the frame, and created a machine that reflected your sense of speed and freedom. That spirit made the Knucklehead more than a motorcycle. It made it a movement. But here's the question that drives our journey today. Why did the Knucklehead specifically become the foundation of American custom style? And how did that transformation ripple outward to shape the look and feel of motorcycles for decades to come? To answer, we'll move through three perspectives: the cultural moment that gave birth to the Knucklehead's legend, the wave of garage innovation that turned it into a style revolution, and the enduring impact that still defines the heart of motorcycle customization worldwide. By the end, you'll see how a machine built in Milwaukee in the young 1930s and refined through the 1940s transcended its technical specifications and became the beating heart of what riders still call the custom life. This is the story of a motorcycle that started it all, and you're about to hear how it happened. So settle in, because the ride is just beginning. The Harley-Davidson Knucklehead rolled into the world at a time when America was standing at the crossroads of depression recovery and looming global conflict, and it became far more than a piece of machinery. It was a symbol of modern design and engineering promise. With its overhead valve V-twin engine introduced in 1936 and refined into the 1940s, it brought performance leaps that made riders feel like they were moving into a new era of speed and endurance. But the real story is not just about engineering. It's about the people who took this bike and shaped it into something personal, cultural, and enduring. Microstory. Picture a young machinist in 1941, saving every dollar to buy a used Knucklehead before heading off to war. He parks it in a dusty shed, returns home 4 years later, and instead of restoring it to showroom form, he strips off the heavy fenders, swaps the seat for a solo perch, and paints it in flat military drab. For him, the bike isn't just transportation. It's a way to reclaim identity after years defined by uniforms and orders. These early transformations set the tone for what was to come, and they raised an unspoken question. Could a motorcycle be more than the sum of its parts? A rolling statement of individuality? That's where the Knucklehead began to separate itself from everything else on the road. Context digest. Harley-Davidson had already established itself as a dominant American manufacturer by the 1930s, but the Knucklehead's engine represented a leap forward. Overhead valves allowed more efficient combustion and higher speeds, which made the bike attractive to racers and thrill seekers. But beyond the numbers, the Knucklehead's design left room for tinkering, and that mechanical accessibility became a key reason riders gravitated toward it as a base for personalization. Microstory. In small-town garages across the Midwest, young riders found that the Knucklehead could be disassembled and rebuilt without factory training. One teenager in Illinois bought a wrecked Knucklehead cheap, hammered the bent frame straight with his father's tools, and discovered that by removing the front fender and trimming the rear, the bike looked faster even while sitting still. That aesthetic transformation, leaner, meaner, purposeful, spread like wildfire among his riding buddies, sparking competition to see who could make their machine look the most aggressive. The push toward lighter, stripped-down bikes was not just about vanity. Returning veterans, many of whom had ridden agile military motorcycles overseas, wanted their civilian rides to match that nimbleness. The Knucklehead, with its powerful engine and relatively simple frame, offered a platform for experimentation that aligned perfectly with those desires. Reflection bridge. The motorcycle was no longer just bought. It was built, shaped, and remade in garages across America. And with that shift, culture began to move as quickly as the machines themselves. Micro-story. In California, wide-open roads and a booming youth culture turned knuckleheads into canvases for even wilder experiments. Riders hacked off anything unnecessary, lowering the bikes and stretching frames for long desert runs. A group of friends in Los Angeles cut their knuckleheads so drastically that local police barely recognized them as factory Harleys anymore. And while authorities grumbled, other young men admired and copied the look. Out of these garages and back alleys, the seeds of the chopper movement were planted. Context digest. At the time, Harley-Davidson was focused on producing reliable, mass-market motorcycles for a broad audience. But they couldn't have predicted that the knucklehead would inspire a subculture that valued minimalism, individuality, and rebellion. The more the factory built stock bikes, the more certain riders felt compelled to customize, creating a cycle of innovation outside the company's walls. Micro-story. One veteran remembered riding his customized Knucklehead through small-town parades where older citizens frowned at the chopped fenders and loud pipes, but young onlookers cheered and asked how they could make their bikes look the same. That generational divide underscored a bigger cultural tension. The Knucklehead was no longer just a motorcycle. It was a lightning rod for identity, rebellion, and post-war freedom. Reflection bridge. What started as individual expression was quickly morphing into a collective style, and that style carried a message too bold to ignore. Context digest. The Knucklehead was not alone in shaping motorcycle culture. British imports like Triumph and BSA were beginning to appear, offering lighter frames and sporty handling. Yet in the United States, the Harley Knucklehead retained a gravitational pull because it combined American iron, raw torque, and a look that could be endlessly altered. It stood at the intersection of tradition and transformation, appealing both to purists who valued its engineering and to radicals who saw it as a blank slate. This intersection would propel the Knucklehead from being a standout model to becoming the definitive symbol of custom motorcycling, setting the stage for its next evolution as the engine that powered the birth of choppers and bobbers across the nation. That transformation takes us deeper into the heart of the movement, where stripped-down design became not just a choice, but a cultural revolution. As the late 1940s gave way to the 1950s, the Knucklehead was no longer just a motorcycle rolling off assembly lines. It had become a cultural beacon, drawing in riders who wanted to mark themselves apart from the mainstream. The war years had taught a generation how to improvise with machines, and now those lessons were being applied in garages, backyards, and borrowed workshops across America. What emerged wasn't simply mechanical tinkering. It was a statement of independence, an aesthetic revolution, and the origin point of the American custom motorcycle movement. Micro-story. In a San Francisco garage, a group of veterans pooled their money to buy 3 battered knuckleheads. One by one, they chopped away parts they deemed unnecessary: fenders, chain guards, even seats for passengers. What was left was raw, stripped, and fast-looking, even when it wasn't running. They didn't call them customs at first. They called them cut-downs, and soon other riders in the Bay Area wanted the same look. Within a few years, the term bobber entered the vocabulary, borrowed from the idea of bobbing fenders short to expose more tire. That garage experiment became the visual identity of a movement. Context digest. Bobbers represented the first true wave of custom culture with their minimalist styling and functional attitude. The Knucklehead was the perfect candidate because its V-twin engine had charisma on its own. It didn't need extra decoration. Builders discovered that by reducing weight and clutter, the bike not only looked cooler but often handled better. Bobbers were proof that customization wasn't just about aesthetics, it could improve performance too. Micro-story. Down in Southern California, the style took another turn. Riders stretched forks forward, lengthened frames, and created what became known as choppers. The Knucklehead engine, big and bold, became the centerpiece of these elongated machines. One teenager, barely 19, welded together his own frame extensions, and when he rolled his Knucklehead chopper down Sunset Boulevard, the sight was so radical that bystanders swore it looked like something from the future. What started as crude experimentation quickly matured into an entire subgenre of design: reflection bridge. The Knucklehead was no longer just being altered. It was being reborn in forms that Harley-Davidson itself had never envisioned. Context digest. This divergence between factory production and street-level reinvention sparked a fascinating cultural tension. Harley-Davidson kept producing bikes with traditional touring features, while young builders demanded sleeker, bolder, lighter shapes. The company sold stability. The riders craved rebellion. Out of that tension, independent builders, speed shops, and custom paint studios began to emerge, forming the backbone of what we now call the aftermarket industry. Micro-story. In New York City, an immigrant painter opened a small shop offering flame designs, pinstriping and candy apple finishes on Knucklehead tanks. For working-class riders, paying for custom paint was a badge of pride, a visible declaration that their motorcycle was unlike any other. His work spread from borough to borough, eventually drawing attention nationwide. Suddenly, custom wasn't just about mechanics, it was about artistry, with the Knucklehead serving as the ultimate blank canvas. Reflection bridge. The bike that once symbolized mechanical progress had now become an engine of cultural imagination, pushing riders to dream bigger and bolder. Micro-story. Consider a group of desert racers outside Las Vegas, who modified Knuckleheads to withstand long-distance off-road punishment. They built reinforced frames, trimmed down fuel tanks, and devised custom suspension setups that could endure brutal terrain. While many broke down, the survivors became legendary, proving that customization wasn't limited to looks. It could push the motorcycle into new environments. These rugged experiments influenced later generations of dirt and dual-sport motorcycles, showing just how far the Knucklehead's adaptability could stretch. Context digest. By the mid-20th century, the Knucklehead was being phased out by Harley-Davidson, replaced by the Panhead in 1948. But the cultural wave it created did not vanish. Instead, it intensified. The Knucklehead became the mythical starting point, the touchstone for custom builders who wanted to channel authenticity. Even as new engines emerged, the Knucklehead remained iconic, often commanding higher respect and value among customizers because of its role as the first true canvas for American-style modification. Micro-story. A motorcycle club in Chicago, made up of steel mill workers, rode almost exclusively Knuckleheads. Each bike looked different, some with radical front-end modifications, others with bare-bones bobber aesthetics, but together they represented unity through individuality. Their weekend rides attracted crowds, and before long, younger riders began copying their look, proving that custom culture was spreading beyond the coasts and becoming a nationwide phenomenon. Reflection bridge. What started as an improvised post-war trend had become an organized, recognized style that reshaped how America thought about motorcycles. The Knucklehead's role in this explosive phase of motorcycle history wasn't about sheer numbers sold or technical dominance. It was about the way it encouraged riders to break rules, rewrite design language, and invent entire new categories of bikes. And as the chopper era took hold and American motorcycling began to influence the world, the Knucklehead's influence traveled far beyond the garages where it was first reborn. That legacy sets us up to explore how its DNA continued to echo across decades, turning a single-engine design into the beating heart of a global custom movement. The legend of the Knucklehead did not fade with time. Instead, it grew stronger, echoing through generations of builders, collectors, and dreamers who looked back at the 1940s as the birthplace of authentic custom culture. By the 1960s and 70s, the chopper craze was in full swing, immortalized in movies and magazines, and at the center of it all, the Knucklehead engine became a symbol of purity and origin. While Harley-Davidson had long since moved on to panheads, shovelheads, and beyond, custom builders sought out Knuckleheads like holy relics, convinced that no other engine carried the same spirit. Micro-story. In a small Los Angeles workshop, a builder in the early 1970s discovered a worn Knucklehead motor at a swap meet. He rebuilt it by hand, dropped it into a long forked frame, and finished it with a radical candy-colored paint job. When the bike hit local shows, it drew lines of admirers who whispered about the rare engine it carried. That single build sparked a surge of interest in finding and preserving Knucklehead motors, elevating their value and cementing their mystique. Context digest. As chopper culture spread through movies, magazines, and clubs, the Knucklehead was increasingly portrayed as the grandfather of custom bikes. Even riders who had never seen one in person knew it represented authenticity. Builders with access to Knucklehead parts became almost like curators of history, balancing the desire to innovate with the responsibility of preserving a disappearing icon. Micro-story. Across the Atlantic, in London, a group of enthusiasts imported battered Knucklehead engines from the US to create American-style customs on British soil. For them, the Knucklehead was more than a machine. It was a cultural import that symbolized freedom, rebellion, and artistry. Seeing those engines roar down European streets proved that the spirit born in American garages could resonate globally, inspiring copycat styles and entire new communities overseas. Reflection bridge. The Knucklehead was no longer just a motorcycle. It had become a myth, a story told through chrome, steel, and open roads. Context digest. By the late 20th century, restoring a Knucklehead had become a serious pursuit. With prices climbing and parts becoming scarce, specialized shops emerged to fabricate replacements and reproduce original components, keeping the lineage alive for builders who refused to let the style vanish. The custom world increasingly divided into two camps: those who built radical choppers pushing the limits of imagination, and those who sought to honor the stripped-down simplicity of early bobbers. Both groups, however, agreed on one thing: the Knucklehead was sacred ground. Micro-story. At a Midwestern rally in the 1990s, a row of Knucklehead customs sat gleaming under the summer sun. Some were pristine restorations, others wild artistic statements, but every single one drew reverence from passers-by. Older riders swapped stories about cutting down their bikes in the 40s and 50s, while younger builders listened in awe, realizing they were standing in the presence of living history. That intergenerational connection highlighted how deeply the Knucklehead's legacy had woven itself into the DNA of American motorcycling. Reflection bridge. A machine once bought as a practical vehicle had transcended utility, transforming into a cultural artifact that bridged decades and continents. Micro-story. In recent years, custom shops from Japan to Australia have continued to reinterpret the Knucklehead aesthetic, blending it with modern fabrication techniques. Builders 70 years removed from its debut still choose the Knucklehead silhouette as their foundation, proving that the style born in post-war America has global endurance. What began as stripped-down experiments in dusty garages now lives on in polished showpieces that win international awards, demonstrating the timeless appeal of simplicity and raw attitude. Context digest. Today, the Knucklehead occupies a dual space. It is both a coveted collector's machine and an enduring design influence. Its value has soared in the vintage market, yet its stylistic DNA appears in countless modern customs. Whether as a centerpiece at major shows or as a quiet inspiration for a backyard builder, the Knucklehead remains relevant, reminding us that great design often comes not from corporate boardrooms, but from riders willing to cut, weld, and create. The lasting impact of the Knucklehead is more than mechanical. It's emotional, cultural, and symbolic. It represents the power of ordinary people to transform industrial products into personal art, to turn steel and rubber into rolling declarations of freedom. It stands as proof that a motorcycle can carry not just riders, but entire movements, shaping the way we think about identity, creativity, and rebellion. And as every rumbling Knucklehead that still roams the roads today proves, its heartbeat continues, reminding us of the moment when custom style first roared to life. The story of the Harley-Davidson Knucklehead in the 1940s is more than just the tale of an engine or a motorcycle. It is the origin myth of an entire culture that continues to thrive today. From its early days as a symbol of technological progress, through its reinvention by returning veterans who turned wrenches in garages, to its global legacy as the heartbeat of custom style, the Knucklehead embodies the American spirit of transformation. It reminds us that great machines don't just roll off assembly lines fully formed. They gain meaning when people put their imagination into them. The stripped-down bobbers and stretched choppers of the past were not about rejecting Harley-Davidson. They were about pushing the boundaries of what a motorcycle could be, both mechanically and culturally. That desire to strip, cut, and rebuild lives on, and every time a builder today chooses a minimalist frame, a solo seat, or a raw paint scheme, they are echoing choices first made by young riders more than 70 years ago. The Knucklehead is proof that a machine can carry ideas bigger than itself, ideas about freedom, self-expression, and rebellion that cross generations and borders. Its legacy isn't locked in museums or limited to collectors. It's alive on the road, in the imagination of every rider who believes their motorcycle should reflect who they are. That's the enduring impact, the reason we can look back at the Knucklehead and still see the spark of something timeless. And so, as we close this journey, we're left with the understanding that the Knucklehead didn't just start custom style, it defined it, and continues to inspire riders to create machines that are as individual as fingerprints. Thanks for riding with us on Overdrive Insider. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.